Welcome to What's the Difference podcast.
I'm Claire.
And I'm Nathan.
Today's story is about a time the police had to make a decision to invade the privacy of a vulnerable child in order to get her the help that she needed, which I know sounds eerily familiar to a story that was in the news recently, the sad disappearance and death of Nicola Bulley.
Yeah.
And in that case, the police shared some very personal information about her, and that was seemingly without actually making a carefully thought out decision. And we
Yeah,
can
I think we
talk
can agree
about
on
that.
that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we could talk about that all day,
Yeah.
but that's for another day. In today's case, though, it was very carefully thought out, and that decision plays a key part in the story that unfolds.
This sounds
So
really,
here it
really
is.
interesting. I'm looking forward to this one. Okay,
Good, good.
let's
So
go.
here we go. We're in Dublin in
Okay,
October 2013.
right.
And the Dublin police, or the Gardaí, I think they're called in
I
Irish.
can never say that.
I think it's
I think
Gardaí.
Gardy. I don't know.
Yeah, Gardaí. I think it's Gardaí.
Yeah, let's stay with that. I'm sure somebody will correct us.
Oh, yes, we'll get corrected, I'm sure. Apologies to my Irish family as well for getting if I've got that wrong. So they have a conundrum anyway. They need help to identify a teenage girl who
Right.
needs help herself, okay?
Okay.
And they want to publish a photograph of her in the media to see if anyone recognises her.
Seems reasonable, isn't it?
Seems reasonable. But because she's a minor, they've got to think really carefully about that. And they've got to weigh up the potential benefit versus the potential harm of publishing this picture and invading her privacy, because she doesn't seem to want to have a photo taken, let alone published.
Okay.
So let's tell the story of why the police are trying to identify her.
That rings
Okay?
that sort of raises some alarm bells, but go on.
It does. It does. But all will be revealed.
Okay.
So this unknown girl had been found just walking up and down near the General Post Office, the GPO, on O'Connell Street, which is a main street in Dublin, on the 10th of October 2013. She appears to be a young teenager. She looks confused. She looks distressed. Very worrying. You can imagine, can't you, if you saw
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, you can. You know, yeah. As a parent, I
So
think anybody would worry, wouldn't you? Yeah.
exactly. So somebody calls the police, or a few people, I think, called the police, and she was taken into care at the local police station. And she was appointed an official guardian.
Right. Okay.
She's under the Child Care Act.
All
But
seems very
despite,
sensible so far.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah.
makes
Yeah. Yeah.
sense so far.
Yeah. It does.
But
Yeah.
despite all their best efforts, the girl would not speak to them. And she would not or could not tell the authorities anything about who she was, where she'd come from, and how she came to be wandering around at the GPO. Again, really
Right.
worrying, isn't it?
Yeah. And sorry, I keep reflecting on GPO. It takes me back to like when I was a kid and it was the GPO. Probably still is the GPO in Ireland, isn't
I
it?
think it's still called the GPO. I don't know if it.
I remember just seeing it. Sorry.
I know the GPO is like a bit of a landmark on O'Connell Street.
It is, yeah.
So
Yeah, sorry.
yeah,
I went on
yeah,
parallel universe there for a minute. Carry on.
yeah. So the police obviously launch an investigation, and this
Mhm.
becomes a huge investigation. They set up a dedicated incident room.
Wow.
It's got its own email address and a
Uh-huh.
phone line that they manned 24/7, trying to get information on who this girl was. So they're really doing everything that they can, but they're struggling to get any information from the girl herself.
Right.
They even look at the clothes that she was wearing when she was found, to see if there's any clues in them. They appear to be from just kind of normal run-of-the-mill large Irish shops,
Right.
but they couldn't work out when they might have been bought. She seems to speak very little English, but from some really stilted communication and her drawing pictures, the police begin to build an idea of where she might have come from. So in the media and with the police, she becomes known as the GPO Girl. She seemed to be about 14 or 15. They think she's come from mainland Europe. And sadly, it seems that she might have been the victim of sex trafficking.
That's not good. That's really
No,
bad.
no. So as well as not speaking, she
Mhm.
wouldn't let them take her fingerprints or her photograph.
What?
So, of course, that's not helping with getting her recognised. But she seems to be traumatised from
Mm.
something. So you
Right.
can understand that.
Yeah. No, yeah. So as you look at that point, you think you wouldn't even think there might be something wrong. You'd go, well, yeah, okay, trauma. No, yeah,
Yeah.
I can see you going.
Yep. She's drawn pictures and it's given them an idea that this is where she's come from.
Yeah.
So they're really torn. What are they going to do? She will not let them take a picture. She won't let them take a photograph, their fingerprints. So eventually they do actually just sneak a picture of her. And she
Okay.
notices and she gets really, really upset. But
Probably
they've
does,
got,
yeah. Yeah.
well, yeah,
Understand
you
why.
can
You can understand
understand
why, could you? Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, no.
And they they're torn because they've got this incident room, they've got the
Mm.
email, they've got the phone lines, they've had loads and loads of potential leads, but
Yeah.
nothing's gone anywhere. They've
Hmm.
not found out who she is. So they are now convinced that they've got to get this photo out to the media
Okay.
so they can find out who she is and get her the help that she needs.
Yeah.
So obviously that's not a simple question. That shouldn't just be, oh yeah, she needs help, we'll just release the picture.
Yes. Yeah.
And you'll be pleased to know that in this case, they didn't just make that decision quickly.
Okay.
They actually took the decision to the courts,
My
and the
word.
High Court in Dublin gave them permission to circulate the photo publicly, even though it obviously wasn't what the GPO girl wanted.
Yeah.
They decided that it was in her best interest.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So on the 5th of November, so remember she was found in October, we're almost a month later, they did release that photo. So it wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. They tried to do everything that they could to get her the help before they
Mm.
released this picture.
This all
So that
seems
was,
really reasonable. It seems
it
like
does.
they've really gone out of the way to try and help this child.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't really
They've
see where this is going actually at the
it's
moment.
not a knee-jerk reaction, which I think we would agree that perhaps in the Nicola Bulley case, it seemed to be a knee-jerk reaction. They just went, oh, we need to tell them something, let's tell them. But this was done really, really carefully. But it is one little photograph, just taken while she wasn't expecting it, but you can see her face in it. And they pop that onto the internet, into the news, and say the media was all talking
Mhm.
about her anyway, and they popped that online. And it worked. So one little photo, one small detail did have a big difference. It did work. They were able to find out who she was. So what did they hear? So they heard from two people around the same time within days.
Oh,
Some
that's good.
sources say within hours, actually, of
Okay,
releasing the picture. One
that's
was a
good.
man in Ireland, in County Tipperary,
Yeah, that makes sense.
and he said that the GPO girl was his ex-partner's daughter who had actually visited him recently and then left saying she was going to visit friends in Dublin and Belfast. And he had no idea why she would not be speaking English. The other person they heard from was a girl in Australia
What?
who recognised her straight away as an
What?
Australian.
Hey?
So again, no reason to not be speaking English. That she'd met 2 years before. She called herself Cody, this girl did. And that was before the church that she joined, that this other girl was a member of the church, found out that she wasn't who she was claiming to be. She was not called Cody. She also
Right.
wasn't 14 or 15.
Oh no.
She was a wee bit older.
Oh, where's this gonna go?
So the good news was the police were able to close the incident room with its phone line, email address, and they told the media at that
Yeah.
time they now know who she is. They know she's from Australia. She's a little bit older than they thought, and they're still working with her to help her. Turns
Okay.
out, wasn't just a little bit older. She was 25.
What?
Uh-huh.
How do you mistake a 14-year-old, 25-year-old for a 14-year-old? Oh my word.
Absolutely. Well, you might ask, how could you mistake 25-year-old for a
Yeah.
15-year-old. It wasn't the first time she'd done something like this.
What? Do you mean if you do? Well, what she doing?
Pretending to be someone
Right?
else. The
No.
authorities believe now that she had created or has created at least 100 different fake identities over the years for her various
What?
cons. At least 100. And quite often she's claiming to be a teenager,
What grief?
to be always several years younger. So some interesting names she's used in the past.
Okay.
Aurora Hepburn. That sounds slightly familiar.
Thinks me likes movies. Go on, what's the next one?
Yeah. And I love this one. This sounds like an 80s detective. Harper Hart.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. Heart to
He
heart.
can,
Oh, yes.
oh, yes, Heart to Heart, of
Heart
course.
to heart, yeah.
Yes, that's
We're
why it
both
sounds
showing our
familiar.
age if we know about heart to heart.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what you mean. So I think she liked the 80s and the films and all that as well. And lots more. She usually claims to be a teenager and
Oh,
always with a really, really sad story. She's either been abused or she's been trafficked or her parents have died. In one horrible con, she says she was a 15-year-old and her
right.
dad has just killed her twin sister and her mum and then himself. And at the time, she was staying with friends. And of course, the friends' parents offered to adopt her until it all unraveled. And it came out that none of this was true. She often claims to
Wow.
be ill or
Mhm.
have learning disabilities. One time she said that she had tuberculosis. Another time she enrolled in and actually attended a school for children with learning disabilities.
What?
So she was way out of school age and she didn't have learning disabilities, but she sent herself to this school.
Oh,
Unbelievable. At least once, she actually combined two cons, which was actually quite clever. She pretended she was a model agent, so a little bit older, not a teenager this time. And she strung along a young teenage girl and the girl's family. And eventually they twigged and they realized that she was just using the girl because
right.
she needed the voice of an actual teenage girl to use in another con. She was trying to get this teenage girl to speak on the phone saying particular words because she was conning somebody
Oh,
else at the
God
time.
grief. Like, that is like way, way high level of sophistication and
It's clever, isn't it?
that planning, the amount of effort's got into that.
Well, yes, the amount of effort she's put into all of these things. There was one time other times she pulled other people into them. One time in particular that really jumped out at me. She told this woman that she met while she was traveling
Right.
that she was in danger and needed to hide out, and said that because this girl was with her, she was in danger as well. And
Oh,
actually had her convinced for a while. The way that one unraveled was that the GPO girl was calling herself Annika at the time. She was pretending to be Swedish. And it worked until two Swedish tourists tried to speak to her in Swedish. And she couldn't
it's
answer
the
back.
simplest things that come on. Get you unstuck, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Don't pretend to be Swedish if you're likely to bump into some Swedish people that will try and
Oh my
speak to you.
word. Wow.
Another time, she claimed to be a qualified au pair and she moved in with a French family who had recently moved to Melbourne in her native Australia. She's Australian. Yeah. A month after she started that au pair job, this was November 2019 by now. So this is
This is
several
another
years
one after.
after.
This is after this one.
Carried on afterwards. Yeah. She told the family she's taking the children on a picnic.
Oh no.
Instead, she took them to a mental health unit and claimed
What?
that she was a 14-year-old who had been abused by her uncle and that these children were other random children. I have no idea what she told them about the children. So
What?
this had been
What?
going on
Sorry, just
for,
go back. What?
yeah, yeah, yeah. She
So
used them as props, basically.
to,
Exactly.
wow. So wow.
I know. I know.
Wow.
So how long it's been going on for started in 2007. Well, it was first brought to the attention of the authorities, or she was brought to the attention of the authorities in 2007. At
Right.
that time, she was 19. So she was actually a teenager at that point. And it was in Australia. She was claiming to be a 14-year-old victim of abuse.
Right.
And she used the name Dakota Johnson, which is actually an actor.
Yeah, I thought that rings a bell. That. Yeah.
She's the actor in 50 Shades of Grey.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So
Moving on
maybe
quickly.
maybe you yeah. Can't say I've seen it. Can't say I want to.
Exactly the same here.
But
Just not
it's a
interested.
real person, and she
Yeah.
used that person's name and said she was a 14-year-old victim of abuse. She was charged with intent to defraud.
Yeah. Has she ever
Yeah.
been to prison?
Wow. We're getting to that.
Okay, because I'm thinking she
So
must be have a lot of people after her by now.
So there has been a time where she was sentenced, I think, to 2 months. And by the time she was sentenced, she'd already done 2 months. So she was released. And then in November 22, so just a couple of
Mhm.
months ago, she was eventually sentenced to 17 months in prison. At this point, she'd committed about 100 offences that we know of. So it was appealed.
What? She peeled it?
She appealed it, appealed the sentence. I think she'd pleaded guilty, but she appealed the sentence and it
Right.
was reduced to 14 months. But a month
Wow.
later, partly due to time already served,
No, no,
she
no.
was released.
Okay. You couldn't even make it. I mean, yeah, you really can't make this up, can you? That
No.
is
So the
wow.
court had heard at that time that she did suffer from something called, and I'll get this wrong, pseudologica fantastica.
Okay, so is that like where somebody makes up a whole story in their mind and it's for them it's real, that sort of thing, is it?
Well, it's compulsive lying, is how it's
Oh
described.
wow. Okay.
But she was diagnosed with that
Mhm.
compulsive lying by an Australian forensic psychiatrist,
Right.
Dr. Jacqueline Rakoff, as part of her
Yeah.
being
Mm.
sentenced at this time. So partly because of that,
Yeah.
and she kind of can't help it, is
Yeah.
the diagnosis, and also because she had served quite a bit of
Mm.
time in the run up to the
Yeah.
court case. She was released in December 2022. So there is
Oh,
actually a documentary about her that came out fairly
really?
recently,
Oh,
um, about Samantha. Samantha is her real name.
okay, right, okay. All right. Well, are we sure?
Well, as far as we know, good point, good question.
Yeah. At this moment,
But
we think it's Samantha doing.
as far as we know, that is her name, is Samantha. And her story is told in this documentary called Con Girl.
Right.
And in that, what I found was really, really interesting. There's a professor of
Mhm.
cognitive science,
Yeah.
Vera Tobin, who explains how people were actually fooled by these stories. Like you said
Yeah.
earlier on, you said, well, how did they mistake her for a
Yeah. I know.
15-year-old?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the description is that Samantha works like a human page turner, like an interesting book. She hooks people in with small things and small confidences. So they feel like they're building a relationship with her.
Yeah.
And then she'll check their susceptibility with bigger stories. And the ones that fall for those bigger stories, she'll keep reeling them in, and she'll keep the twists and turns coming. So you never quite know what to expect, and it's always
Wow.
interesting, and it just keeps you
She
on the
must be a
hook.
brilliant storyteller.
Oh yeah, I bet she's fascinating to listen to.
I bet. I mean,
Yeah.
I bet she. I mean, if she was able to, and if somebody could trust her enough, you'd get a good book out of that as well as a movie, wouldn't you? It's like,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
wow.
But yeah, like you say, which part of it would be?
Yeah, which bit's
Oh,
true? Which bit do I
yeah,
know?
yeah. So as far as we know, she's called Samantha Azzopardi,
You're right.
and she was born in Sydney in
Hmm.
1988.
Right.
And her parents split up when she was very young, about two, we
Mm.
think.
It sounds like there's got to have been something that triggered all that to live a life like that,
There's
and
got to be, hasn't there?
to do it with no sort of almost like no emotion or care for others. It's just it's all very much it's almost like a almost what do they call it? Almost narcissistic, isn't it? It's sort of like
Yeah.
inward looking, isn't it? And
Like she's the
it has
star, isn't
yeah.
she? She's the star of the
Just
story.
yeah, she really is the star of her own show.
Yeah. Yeah. Like with a name like Aurora Hepburn
I know.
or Harper Hart, absolutely. So the story that has been
Mhm.
put together is that she seems to have lived with her mum, first of all, when her parents split
Yeah.
up, until she was about 11. And then this was interesting. Her father is described as having regained custody.
Okay.
So it sounds like there was a bit of a battle there.
Hmm.
And she moved around a lot. She went to lots of different schools. And that seems to be where she started inventing stories, inventing a history for
Yeah.
herself, maybe to sound more interesting when she
Yeah.
went to school, get, make friends.
It's the natural thing that all kids do, isn't it? So kids
Yeah.
like they build pretend friends, they have these imaginary worlds. It's almost like
Yeah.
that bit of play has now become her life. And
Yeah.
now
It's expanded.
yeah, the whole thing has become her way of being. It's a natural thing for her to do.
Yeah. And
Wow.
coming back to when she was known as the GPO
Yeah.
girl,
How much that must have cost.
there was wow, that's a good
I'm just
question.
thinking how
Yeah.
imagine just the money to run a 24-hour line and all those
Yeah.
people searching and
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands are spent
Yeah.
trying to find out. Wow,
Days and weeks.
it
And
is.
everyone worried about her as well.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, all the people that invested all their time and effort, and people that would
Yeah.
have shared information, and people that would have spent time trying to talk to her. And
Yeah. Yeah.
those are the people I feel really sorry for because it's like those people. I mean, there's other people that have been conned, and I don't know whether the people
Yeah.
from some sort of monetary losses, but it's that emotional investment when you've got tried to care for somebody and you've gone, oh, this isn't what I expected.
Mm. And that's interesting that there doesn't seem to be in the other stories much monetary value
Yeah,
from what she gains. It seems to be it's that sympathy and it's that attention
yeah,
that she seems more interested in. And the Irish police were really divided actually on how they felt she should be dealt with when
yeah,
they found out that this GPO girl was actually Samantha Azzopardi and
yeah,
not 15. And there were some who said, well, she's not actually committed a crime because she didn't claim anything had happened to her. She
yeah,
just hinted at it with
yeah,
the way she behaved and the things that she drew.
yeah.
And those people said, well, she doesn't need punish, she needs mental health treatment,
Yeah,
which I think we could
it's
agree
pretty
with.
much yeah, absolutely. Because that's not um what is normal human behavior, but that's not what you would generally expect of somebody that you would go to that length to pretend to
Yeah,
be something and to do
yeah,
it repeatedly in multiple situations everywhere you
yeah.
go and travel the world and do it as well.
Traveled the world, absolutely. She went all over the place.
And it's sort of like, well, yeah,
But then others, coming back to you saying, well, how much time and effort and
yeah,
money's gone into that, were saying that they wanted a charge for wasting police time.
yeah,
Now, they didn't do that. And I think partly it was because, as the others had said, that she didn't actually say anything.
yeah,
Quite clever, really. She was mute and she didn't say anything.
Oh, she's not daft at all. I
No,
mean,
not
it's
daft
obviously
at all.
highly intelligent from the sound of it. Very, very
But they
intelligent.
absolutely, but they did find out she had entered the country on a false passport. So I don't know what name was on that, but it was a false passport. But the only penalty for entering the country on a false passport was deportation. And she
Okay.
agreed that she'd go home anyway.
That
So
doesn't really feel like a punishment, if I'm
it
really
doesn't
being
really,
honest, does
does
it?
it? No,
It really doesn't, does it? It's
no.
like, yeah.
So she got a free flight, basically, all the way back to Australia. And she was accompanied by
Yes.
two of the Gardaí.
Oh,
So
good grief. Imagine that. Just that. Because they couldn't fly there and back. They would have to stay over and eat like,
yeah,
that's
it's a
like,
long way to
it's a
go,
long
isn't it?
way. Yeah. And it's probably going to be in
Yeah,
decent seating as well because they've got to keep her secure. So it ain't going to
that's
be
true.
cheap, is it? So it's going
Yeah,
to be like 10 or 15,000 pounds. Oh,
yeah, yeah,
grief.
yeah. So yeah, I think that's so
Wow.
interesting that she managed to do all that and then not even be charged with anything in that
Yeah.
one. Eventually, I say she did get caught, and quite often, again talking about small
Yeah.
details that make a
Yeah.
big difference. How she was caught out often was that she'd forged documents or emails,
Yeah.
and they just didn't stand up to scrutiny.
Yeah.
They only a very brief glance they
Yeah.
would stand up to,
Mm.
but she used fake letters and fake documents to try and get into schools and private schools and so on. And when you looked at them, apparently they just didn't stand up to scrutiny. There were errors that jumped out at you.
Yeah, and I think if you think about that, right at the beginning, you talked a lot about the fact that she just didn't want her picture taken, she didn't want fingerprints taken. And you can
Yeah,
understand from the point of view of trauma, but now if you understand the point of view of a fraudster, no, I don't want my
yes,
fingerprints taken. Don't you dare take my picture. And that's why she was so
absolutely.
angry when they actually took her picture, because I think she probably
Yeah,
realized that the moment that happened that the
yeah,
game was up.
yeah, because she'd done this so many times. So people that had been fooled by her before, hurt by her, they
Yeah.
recognised her straight away. So this girl, she had
Yeah.
that was an interesting story. She had gone to this church and become part of the community and told the church that she'd been sent by God to them. And so they must have been so hurt.
Oh.
Just horrible, just awful. But like you say, why? Why is she doing this? There's something there in her past, isn't there?
Yeah,
That's
no,
just,
that's not that. You do look at that, and that is some form of mental health disorder,
yeah,
as you described the condition that they've diagnosed. And in some ways, you almost feel sorry. I feel sorry for
yeah,
something like that, because
yeah,
if that's how you feel that you want to live your life, that's going to end up a very lonely place, very
absolutely.
lonely place.
I mean,
And
she's only early 30s now, and she's already done all this 100 times at
yeah,
least. She's been in prison for it.
yeah,
How are you ever going to make real friendships?
yeah. Well, how can you ever trust that her friendship's real?
Yeah, you
It's
couldn't, could
like
you?
what's the old cartoon? Is it Peter and the Wolf? He cries wolf too many times,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
eventually
Yeah,
one day you are really really sick and you are really really
yeah,
ill. Something is really
yeah,
wrong with you, and everybody goes, "Oh no, you're not. You're
yeah,
supposed to be doing that." And then yeah, and it's the importance. So that's why we say to if anybody who's parents, you say to your children, isn't it? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, don't cry wolf for that particular reason. We say
absolutely.
that particular. That's where that phrase
Yeah,
came from, because it's the
yeah,
whole thing about don't keep on saying that you are something when it's not happening, and don't over dramatize things
yeah,
when there really is nothing that needs to be dramatized at that particular moment, because eventually people get used to it and stop listening.
yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because you can
Nobody's
almost
going to
guarantee that
trust her
her
now.
picture is now being circulated across other law enforcement, because
Oh, yeah, yeah,
and so if you imagine her trying to get into a country now, someone's going to be like, she's going to have to do a
yeah,
real significant change to be
yeah.
able to get in.
Not done herself any favors.
Wow, that was an amazing story. That really,
So
really was.
you hadn't heard that before then?
No, I'd
You
never
didn't
heard
know
that
that
before.
story?
Do you know what's really ironic about this, though? I'll tell you really briefly, but this is
Mm,
almost a mirror of something that happened to myself. Um,
no.
yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, it'd be really, really quick. We're going to describe this person. I'm going to give his initial. So he's
Yeah.
it's P. We're going to call him.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
not going to identify who he is. But the so my father-in-law, should I say,
Hmm.
was a prison minister, and he met this gentleman in prison who was the only person there on civil claim. He was the only person in the certain prison under civil claim,
Yeah.
and he claimed that all these things had happened to him, and there was things in the news you could corroborate. And he
Right.
needed somewhere to stay because he was going to be released, and they wouldn't release him unless he had somewhere he was ready. But
Right.
there was a threat to his life. There was some very
Yeah.
serious people after him and everything else, and it all seemed to tie up. And at that point, he had there was an empty house. Actually, this house that I live in now
All right.
was the house that was currently empty. And I said, yeah, you know what? If you need
Yeah.
somewhere for a couple of weeks to live, we can support him.
Yeah.
I'm also from a religious background, and so you know what? It's
Yeah.
a good thing to do for somebody
Good
who's
thing to
obviously
do.
going through a
Yeah.
difficult time. Worked out absolutely fine. He was very, very interested. He used to discuss sort of different beliefs with ourselves. And then after about 4 or 5 weeks, all of a sudden it was really hard to get hold of him.
Ah.
And he was supposed to be paying some money that was coming to him, and the money
Yeah.
never appeared. And see how this is going.
Yeah.
And then we started to do a little bit of digging, and then it turns
Mm.
out that there's been other cases about him in the past. And when you dig into there's lots of things. I mean, apparently
Mm.
he was at some point, this is going to sound really familiar. At one point there was some government agency after him. He was under threat from the IRA at some point as well. He was currently banished from certain places where he wasn't banished from those places.
Yeah.
He was a pilot at one time. You know, he was very, very renowned and very good at what he did. So he had a lot of background in that, and he
Mm.
was involved with
Mm.
running certain things. He fell out with who his employer was at the time in a massive
Mm.
way, and apparently that was all part of it. He got divorced, and that was part of it as well. Lots of other things went on. I don't know. I can't explain much to it, but you know, this is a man that looked genuinely needed help.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
supplied him with a house, made sure he had
Yeah. Yeah.
bedding and everything, found him a washing machine, a cooker, and all the other things from there. He could live there. And we said, look, initially, you don't worry about the bills. You've got somewhere to stay. And that's
Yeah.
how it went on. And after 4 or 5 weeks, couldn't get in contact with him. 2 months, talked to him a bit.
Yeah.
Again, nothing more. Almost 18 months later, it took for me to
Yeah.
finally get him evicted.
Oh
And
goodness.
now yeah, had to go to court, the whole lot. The whole lot.
Oh,
Whole thing
horrible.
went through, everything else. Cost me thousands. Still owes me
I bet.
thousands. But do
Mm.
you know what? Move on with it, because otherwise
Yeah.
if you keep hold of that, you just become bitter, and that's not.
Yeah.
It's actually turned out to be a massive benefit, which I'll explain in a minute. But what's really, really bad is about 6 months after I'd finished with it all, I was no,
Mm.
probably a bit longer, almost a year after I finished with it.
Mm.
I got a random phone call from a gentleman and said, "Did you used to rent to this man?" And it was like, "Yes."
Mm.
And he says, "Oh," he says, "I'm from X investigation agency. We've been hired to try and locate the gentleman." Okay, and
Oh.
he said, "We got some details
Mm.
back to the person you were talking to." He'd walked out of where we were and gone done exactly the same thing to somebody else in another place.
Oh
But
dear.
that person was a lot more indebted in this and spent a lot more time
Yeah.
investigating. It turns out he's been doing this for over 30 years.
30 years.
30 years. Done it to myriads of people before. He's been
Wow.
involved in other confidence scams and things in the past.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. So, but every time you see him, a different name, different person, doing
Wow.
a different thing, he's selling something different, doing something different. It's
Oh,
all very
I,
focused around that internal person. But his speciality, when things go wrong, he looks for special interest groups, religions, anybody who
yeah.
is like a charity or anybody who is going through a difficult time. So for me, I was
Yeah.
a carer for my family.
Yeah.
Involved with
Yeah.
everything else. The other person, he had somebody who was sick. Every
Yeah.
single time it follows the same pattern, because you haven't got the time to go and deal with it.
Yeah. Anyone who's
Yeah.
kind is
Yes.
gonna, yeah.
Yeah. And there's lots in his past. I know, and I spoke to him a
Yeah.
lot, and you can see there's, damn it, something's happened there. Why would you do
Yeah.
that? But
Well, you wouldn't, yeah. Yeah.
you do that,
And
would you?
all that energy and
Yeah. Just put the energy into something that's
brain
actually,
power.
yeah, and it
Yeah.
just is. But and ultimately, his house was absolutely just, yeah, it was destroyed. I
Yeah.
had to do so much to it. But the positive out of this is that
Yes.
it forced me to make a decision about this place. It's been so for
Yeah.
those that first time you ever listened to this, so I'm a carer for my family. Both my wife and my son are disabled. It was my wife was something very sudden, and my son was later on in life. But we couldn't live in this house. The house wasn't adapted for anybody in a wheelchair. It wasn't set up. So we had to live somewhere else and try and deal with this property that was being dealt with. It was a nightmare. And we've been umming and ahhing about what to do. And that just forced our hand, because it was like, you know what, don't want to do that anymore. And if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have gone and invested the time and done. We've now got a place that we love. Anybody who's seeing this is my son's room, you know, it's, and I am into Star Wars, and I do like space. He likes it much more than I do. So I think it just, that whole story really touched a nerve with me, because I've been through that exact same thing with somebody else who's done something identical.
Oh, that's spooky. I
It
didn't
is,
know
isn't
that.
it? It's
That's
really, no, there you are. There's a story you didn't know either.
Yeah.
But I think, doesn't it just help us to make sure that it's important that, for me, I'm the sort of person that will always try and help somebody.
Yeah.
But I think once it's happened to you, it's a bit like buyer beware, isn't it? You're a little bit more cautious now about somebody who's wanting help or wants support, which is sad now.
Yeah, I do understand that. Yeah. And I do always try and weigh up, could I afford to lose this?
Yes.
You see people saying, oh, you should never give to anyone on the streets because they probably have a Mercedes parked around the corner. Well, if they do, it's their karma. It's their, it's on their heads.
Yeah.
And I'm only giving them a few pounds, which I could afford to lose anyway. I wouldn't, I'm not going to give them the shirt off my back.
Yeah, I'm of a similar ilk to you. Exactly the same thing, of just, that's how it is.
Because if you go through life thinking all the time, oh, well, they might have a Mercedes around the corner, or they might not need that money. Well, it would be a really sad way to live, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and that's just not how I want to live my life. So that's exactly it.
No.
So I think, to summarize, before you and I wander off down a different track somewhere, that is an amazing story, Claire. I'm really looking forward to telling you my story next week.
I'm looking forward to hearing it
as well. And I hope for everybody that has listened, this is the first episode of What's the Difference podcast. Hope you understand now what this actually is, because we're still trying to work it out ourselves.
Do we know what it is? No. We'll get there.
It will evolve, and we'll look forward to anybody's feedback and comments. So over to you, Claire. I've talked enough.
So I just wanted to say thank you as well to everyone for listening. And you can find us on LinkedIn and on Twitter. Give us a follow and come and say hi. And in the meantime, until next week, thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.